enthusiasts and relaxation seekers. My name is Cinephile ASMR, and today we are finally talking about Matt Reeves, the Batman. I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that this has not only been my most anticipated movie of 2022, but has been a film on my radar for so long that it has encroached into becoming easily one of my most anticipated movies of all time. It has gone through development hell. Studio has interfered so much that it was originally going to have Ben Affleck, and it was at one point even going to be directed by him as well. But creative differences, visions that clashed, prevented him from pursuing that, and now he's not playing the role anymore. Matt Reeves stepped in, didn't like the way that the studio was kind of seeing what they wanted, so he asked for $100 million and made this. And with every promotional tease, image, and poster, which I think is genius, like the marketing team deserves a raise, having to take a black light to some of these posters that would unearth riddles, that would take you to websites, which would just expand the lore and generate hype, was genius. And I saw this movie on Tuesday. I know. I was fully prepared to make a video that night and post it Wednesday, but if I were to describe one word to this film as I was getting into the theater, as I was dressed up in my Jim Gordon attire, and as I got The Long Halloween, Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale as like a gift for getting this screener, I could not be more excited. And when I stepped out of the theater, I did something that I was not expecting to have done, and I don't think I've ever really had this emotion before after seeing a major comic book film. And I've said for so long that this is going to set the bar. This is going to be the new standard for how we go about digesting comic book content, especially films. And I came out silent as the credits rolled. I wasn't talking to my friends. I wasn't jumping on my phone, making a tweet about it, making a post. No, I was silent for hours. I talked to my friends about it, generated what I believe to be my own perception, but I was overwhelmed. This is a massive movie, a massive one that I'm not saying in terms of big scale like Endgame, but when you have a Batman origin film that is nearly 3 hours long, almost 6 minutes less than the finale and concluding chapter to 18 films in a cinematic universe like Endgame, I knew it was going to be big, but I was not prepared for the amount of overload that this movie was going to throw at me in a very beautiful way. I could start at any facet of this movie, but I think I'll start at the beginning. This movie, to me, has the greatest opening that I've ever seen to any comic book film, period. It lays the foundational groundwork for what this world of Gotham is that has been stricken by corruption, greed, and deception. It lays out Bruce Wayne, the Batman, which I will get into in a minute, but it also sets up the Riddler in one of my favorite introductions to a villain in a movie that I've ever seen. It is haunting. It is terrifying. This movie borderlines a threshold of horror that I have not seen before, particularly with Riddler pushing the PG-13 rating. It was this close to being like, whoa, which I will also get into. But I can't stress those first 10 minutes laid out so much for me. And it's very interesting that I got the first issue of arguably one of my favorite comics ever written, The Long Halloween, because this opening really does remind you of the dark, eerie grunginess of Gotham and the occupants in it, just like that. And it sets up so much. And after those 10 minutes, you unravel a story with so many facets, so many moving parts. I'm actually blown away at the existence of this movie. A 3-hour Batman origin film with $100 million, a new face to play the Caped Crusader, and a whole new world. But, and I don't say this often, but Warner Brothers did the best thing they could by giving total creative freedom to Matt Reeves and everyone involved. After those 10 minutes, I was buckled in, and a lot of people say that they didn't feel the 3-hour runtime. I'm not gonna say I didn't, but I'm not also saying that because it was boring or for too long. There is not, and I don't mean to be this guy. If someone were to say, oh, they should have at least trimmed 15 minutes, in my head, I'm trying to think of what 15 minutes would you cut? Everything seems so essential, whether it be through character development, lore building, story growth, just everything worked and fit in a certain place. But I was just constantly pinching myself because I knew that this had to come to an end, and I wanted so much of it to stay. And that also goes down to the characters. I'll start off with probably one of my favorites, Selena Kyle as Catwoman, and Zoe Kravitz playing that character is not an easy feat to execute, but she does things in this movie by giving her character detail and backstory without like overtly telling the audience, and it works so well in my opinion. Zoe Kravitz is one of the best actresses working in Hollywood, not only for her physicality with how she moves like a cat, but because you can tell that she has gone through so much within her experience, knowing the underbelly of Gotham and having to do things for hopefully the right reasons in the end. And it's gorgeous the way that she interacts with Bruce and Batman. It's probably going to be my favorite romance of 2022. Their chemistry is so wonderful. And then you have Alfred, played by Andy Serkis, which I thought was an incredible casting choice. It makes sense given the fact that Matt Reeves did the last two Planet of the Apes films with Andy Serkis playing Caesar. And he was something that I wasn't expecting because I'm so conditioned to Alfred being this fatherly figure, to Bruce being this sense of like pathos and emotion like Michael Caine. But this is a lot more of a reserved, hardened individual who has done time in the like CIA, and as a result, like, you see his weathered beaten face. He doesn't give that shoulder to have Bruce cry on, and nor does Bruce cry on it. And it gives a perfect gateway to understanding Robert Pattinson's character and his performance, because this is a Bruce Wayne that we've never seen before, and how they interact in the scenes that they are. You have to like really dig deep into what is going on because it's so multi-layered. And what I love about this film so much is that it takes this time to show a Bruce Wayne who has donned the cape and the mask for years. But that isn't to say that he has all the answers. You can tell the youth in him, the anger, the pure rage that he has at Gotham and the people higher up that is destroying its infrastructure. But you can also tell that he is passionate and that his head and his heart is in the right place. It's just the way that he goes about it is wrong. And the one thing that I wasn't expecting about Robert Pattinson was his detachment, was how step back from society it feels like he is from a different planet in Gotham. And at first, this is a thing that I felt along the movie because I was conditioned to seeing Bruce Wayne from the animated films, from the Dark Knight trilogy, a Bruce Wayne that is charismatic, that is gregarious, that is outgoing, but also has that emotion. And there is so much in this movie that Robert Pattinson doesn't say a line of dialogue, and most of his scenes involve him donning the suit. So it leaves up to those eyes, and that man is a beautiful eye actor. I think this is the greatest performance that we'll ever get from a Batman ever, because it isn't what he says, but what he doesn't say, and just uses his eyes to dictate. And there's moments in this film, particularly ones where you could have like cashed in on the emotion, and instead it's more served towards silence. And that could be kind of like unsatisfying on initial watch, but I think when you finish the film and you realize the kind of character that Matt Reeves and the writers were trying to approach with, you get it, you understand, and there is an arc from the beginning to the end. And there's moments in this film when he's outside of the cape that he is just so electrifying. And a moment in particular at the funeral, I'm not trying to spoil who the funeral is for, but it's been in the trailers a little bit, and he's looking at this boy, and there's a reason why he's looking at this boy, but the way that he's able to attach himself just by standing there and looking at him, he doesn't go pat him on the back, hug him, tell him anything, give him words of affirmation. He just stands there, and it's for a bit, puts on the suit. I'm sorry, Batfleck fans. Trust me, I'm a Zack Snyder stan till the day I die, and I think Ben Affleck is menacing. But I'm gonna tell you right now, Robert Pattinson is the most intimidating Batman we have ever seen. He might not be the most physically fit. He is a hunk of a man, but he has scenes and shots in this movie where all you hear is just these clanking boots moving towards the frame out of the shadows, and you cannot help but feel chills. And that also goes to a testament to the sound design, which is immaculate. I'm gonna get to the Batmobile, do not worry, but it's within Robert Pattinson's conviction towards the character, and it's the communal understanding of what this sort of Bruce Wayne signifies, and his detachment from society, and his eyes. There is one shot in this movie which instilled the fear of the Bat Gods into me, and it's this part within this car chase that you've seen in the trailer, and he looks at a criminal for a few seconds. I got chills just thinking about it. Robert Pattinson is the greatest Batman we've ever had, not because of what he says, but because of what he doesn't. Another very interesting factor towards this movie, which is his relationship, him being Bruce, towards Jim Gordon. And the Dark Knight trilogy really shows Gary Oldman and Christian Bale, like, their dynamic more as like a fatherly figure to Bruce Wayne, and there's like a different level of like power and knowledge and understanding. Like, they still work together so well, but it's on like a different playing field. But this felt like a buddy cop detective noir thriller, and this is like an origin story for everybody, because he isn't the commissioner yet in the movie, in the beginning of the movie at least, and you see how they interact, and you can tell, and it even says in the movie, like, they're the only two people that they can trust within the precinct, but within Gotham, to serve justice, because there's so much corruption littered throughout, and it's within how they operate with one another. Like, you can feel that they're on equals, and this is a detective thriller. What I wasn't the biggest fan of, and I love the Dark Knight trilogy, I think it is glorious, and I love Zack Snyder's portrayal, but it didn't feel like a detective story, and I've wanted that for so long. And for so much of the movie, you see Bruce in the bat suit, and he's going through old files, paperwork, connecting the dots, trying to figure out this mystery from the Riddler, and it's glorious. I love it, and him and Jeffrey Wright are so good together, and there's a lot more screen time with them in it than I ever expected. That leads me to what they're trying to fight within the corrupt system. That goes to Colin Farrell as Copperbot, the Penguin, and John Turturro as Carmine Falcone. So we've seen the Penguin, Colin Farrell, many times in the promotional trailers, teasers, images, and his transformation physically is night and day insanity. And I wanted to see him so badly because Colin Farrell is a terrific actor. But one thing that I kept in the back of my mind when it came to John Turturro as Carmine Falcone, which we have not seen, is an interview where Farrell said that, like, the Penguin fears Falcone. Everyone looks up to him not out of desire, but because they need to, because if they don't, they're done. But seeing how much we've gotten of the Penguin and his physical stature, I was finding it very difficult to see how, like, that would translate, because the Penguin looks disgustingly, like, sinister, but they find a way to show that power struggle, the dynamic, and Colin Farrell just is a scene stealer in every moment he's in. Honestly, he's one of the best actors as well, and I cannot give enough props to the casting director in this movie for casting everyone so perfectly within their characters. And it's just, he chews up every scene in the movie, not only from his physical transformation within the prosthetics, but within how he acts, and his accent is baffling. The fact that, like, in real life, Colin Farrell's Irish, I believe, and he assumes, like, this Jersey, New Yorker accent with, like, this groggle in his voice is so good. And then you have John Turturro as Carmine Falcone, who you are supposed to fear, as he is, like, the kingpin of Gotham. And I can't even lie, John Turturro scared the crap out of me. And there's a certain story choice that is revealed later in the film that I think actually adds a lot of layers and hatred towards this man, and you can feel it. You can feel the corruption literally making Gotham on the brink of collapse, and it all ebbs and flows so terrifically. All of these actors give it their A game, and that from a visual level is something that needs to happen to convince us of this story. And this is also aided by easily some of the best direction, some of the most sharp, razor-edged vision that I've seen in a movie that is so well realized, and hearing the fact that this movie was like pre-visualized through VR, where the shots and the composition and the lenses were used in this pre-viz, it just shows that like the amount of preparation and dedication even amidst the pandemic was so good. And Matt Reeves is one of the greatest filmmakers working today. That also goes hand in hand with Greg Fraser, who just recently shot Dune, who sought out for the stars, and in pursuing so, I think gives us one of the best, if not the greatest looking comic book film we have ever seen to date. This movie is one of the best looking eye candies I've seen in a major blockbuster in a very long time. The use of colors, focal length, depth of field, what is blurry in the foreground and the background, training the audience's eye to see certain things, gives this story such an immersive element, which is also aided by the fact that the production design, and this is something I've wanted for so long, because like the Dark Knight trilogy is immaculate, and I hate comparing them, but the one thing that I've always not liked outside of Begins, because you see the Narrows and it was such amazing production design, was in the Dark Knight Rises. It didn't feel like Gotham. It felt more like a Chicago or a New York. It felt like someplace I could travel to, and I don't want that. I want Gotham to be its own identity. And you see how the greed, corruption has manifested itself into the buildings, into the gross, grimy grunginess, as it's like a rain, ugly murkiness that just seeps its way through. It's disgusting. It's packed. It's like a Gotham we've never seen before, and I loved every second of it. And I have to talk about the score. Michael Giacchino's score is the greatest live action score he's ever composed. I cannot believe he did what he did for certain moments, and it just goes to completely transform this world into something that is going to be fresh for the audience. It's going to set a bar, like I said, on every department, from acting, directing, production design, shots, camera work, musical composition. It is terrific. Michael Giacchino is one of those composers that it's like, he does so much, but I find it hard to be like, man, I want to listen to that score. There's a lot that he's done, especially within the animated realm, that I'll be listening to on repeat. But finding this score to be one of my favorites was a major surprise to me. Now, I've been saving one thing, because when I initially saw this movie, I was kind of like, it really kind of forced me to take a step back and analyze it in a very different perspective, because I was not really prepared for how it was going to go, and that was how they handled Paul Dano's The Riddler. So the Riddler, when I first heard of its announcement being the main villain in this film, I was cautiously optimistic. I love the Riddler. I will always take villains that don't use like a brute force machismo, like fists to solve and to beat down the protagonist, but rather like mental mind games that are there to deconstruct the protagonist at their core. So I was there for it. And Paul Dano gives one of the most hauntingly committed roles as an antagonist to a superhero film that I've ever seen, and the things that he does in this movie and the way that it's framed and shot is something that I think will be ingrained into your mind, as is so many memorable moments. And it came down to the third act, and I was very intrigued, because it was kind of, you can tell like it's gonna wrap up somehow, and then it doesn't. And when I left the theater, I was like, oh man, I wish they got to maybe trim that. But then the more I thought about it, the way that I see now the Riddler and Batman is they have been sprouted from the same soil, and the way that they've gotten into their upbringing has been very different, through Bruce Wayne being within a family of billionaires. So although he was an orphan, he had money, he had Alfred, he had a support system to a certain extent. And I'm not going to go into like what they do with the Riddler's character, but it's very evident that they are stripped from the same grain, and as a result, like, they are a lot more connected than you think. And I think it comes down to how they're introduced and how the movie concludes. And at the very end of it, now it is a movie that requires you to think. It requires you to sit on things, not to make rash opinions. Because if I were to say this about any movie in the comic book field, it would be this: to sit, digest, chew, and process, because there's going to be oh so much to process. From the sound design to the more technical elements to what we see on screen through the acting, it is so good. And there's chase and the fight sequences in this, I think, rival it and then some. That Batmobile is the greatest thing that I've ever heard. See this movie on a sound system because it will rupture your eardrums and make your body shake. It was just a genius endeavor into like a film, creative freedom. What happens when you make a film, not one like studio man, like, so the way that I feel now about this is I will never look at any superhero film the same again when they choose directors but don't give them total creative freedom. Like, this is going to change the way that I see every major blockbuster now, especially within comic book films. And I'm looking at you, Marvel. Their Disney Plus stuff, not seen Hawkeye, has been very like creatively fulfilling, but a lot of their stuff, and I love Eternals, I love all the movies that they've been putting out recently, but I would have never known that that's Chloe Zhao. I would have never known that's Destin Daniel Cretton, like making Shang-Chi and Eternals. Like, they don't give creative freedom in its totality, and I understand to a certain extent because they've like created this massive like level of existence in terms of major blockbusters, and they have to follow some similar formula. And I think for the DC it does hurt for their extended universe because you have like James Gunn with the Suicide Squad, followed up by Matt Reeves the Batman, and they're living in these own bubbles. But I think in terms, I would take that at the detriment of like an extended universe for them to have creative freedom because of this movie. So with all that being said, easily one of the greatest experiences I've had, a top 3 comic book film, a movie that has made me think and think every day. It has infected and populated my mind. The best portrayal of Batman that we've ever seen in a very unique and fresh light. Catwoman is fantastic. The Penguin is amazing. Alfred is fantastic. Like, Jim Gordon and how he interacts with the Batman in this detective noir, grungy, hard-boiled theme is terrific. This sense and realized universe that this movie lives on and it exists within is something so fleshed out that I don't think we'll ever see again. It doesn't even set a trilogy, it sets an entire universe. I just hope it stays within that and it doesn't become like an extended universe, bringing in Aquaman, all of these characters. It needs to live within itself because this beating heart is stronger than I've ever seen. So with all that being said, I'm going to give Matt Reeves the Batman an A freaking plus. Let me know what you guys thought down below. This has easily been one of my favorite movies that I've watched in a long time. It's going to be discussed for years to come. And regardless of if you do or do not like it, you have other options to watch, whether it be through, you know, Ben Affleck, Christian Bale, George Clooney, the Batnips. It's like you have it all. So let me know what you thought down below. And as always, I love you so much. Be prepared for a couple new announcements dropping soon. Let me know what you thought. I love you guys very much. Name's Cinephile, ASMR, and remember to take life one frame at a time.